My name is Wesley Abernathy, deep-sea welder turned survivor. 3 days ago, I was working offshore when the world collapsed into hungry chaos. I've stayed alive by using the one thing most people forgot in their panic: silence. The infected hunt by sound, and I've learned their rules. This is how I survived the first 72 hours of the zombie outbreak, alone and surrounded. Before we start the video, let us know what country you are tuning in from in the comment section below. Perhaps we will make a story there. Let's begin. Before all this, I was just Wesley Abernathy, deep-sea welder and disaster recovery specialist. Funny how those skills would end up being exactly what kept me alive. I specialized in underwater construction and repair work, mostly for oil companies, but I also did contract work for FEMA and other emergency response agencies. The kind of work most people never think about until something goes wrong. Fixing infrastructure after hurricanes, earthquakes, floods. You name a disaster, I was the guy they called to get things running again. 3 days before everything fell apart, I was on contract at an offshore oil rig about 40 miles from the Denver metropolitan area. My team and I were doing routine maintenance on the underwater support structures. It was supposed to be a 2-week job. Simple, straightforward. The kind of work I could do in my sleep after 15 years in the field. The weather was perfect that morning. Clear skies, light breeze. Nothing that would suggest the world was about to end. I remember joking with my colleague Dave about how we'd finish early and have time for fishing before heading back to shore. Normal conversations, normal concerns. The last normal day. My specialized training wasn't anything special in my mind back then. Working in confined spaces, problem solving with limited resources, staying calm when everything goes wrong. That was just the job. But those skills became the difference between life and death when society collapsed. Every emergency scenario I'd ever trained for suddenly became reality, all at once. Looking back, there were warning signs all along. People with strange, glassy eyes at the gas station when we made our supply run. The hospital parking lot overflowing 3 days before. The way the birds stopped singing that morning. Small things that your brain filters out, because they don't fit with how the world is supposed to work. The first real hint came during our lunch break. Someone had left the TV on in the break room, tuned to a local news channel. The anchor was talking about incidents of extreme violence in several major cities: Boston, New York, Los Angeles. They were calling it mass hysteria, possibly linked to contaminated water supplies or some new designer drug. We barely paid attention. Bad news is always happening somewhere else, right? Ryan, one of the younger guys on the crew, mentioned his sister in Chicago had texted about lockdowns at the hospital where she worked. Too many patients coming in with the same symptoms: aggression, disorientation, fever. We told him it was probably just a bad flu season. We were so blind back then. By evening, the news reports had gotten more frequent, more urgent. Military deployments to major cities. Quarantine zones established. Travel restrictions. Still, it felt distant. Someone else's problem. Dave made a joke about zombie movies, and we all laughed. That's what I remember most clearly. How we laughed. The internet started getting spotty that night. Cell service too. We attributed it to the usual connectivity issues you get on remote job sites. No one considered that the infrastructure might be failing because the people who maintained it were no longer people. The next morning, the tone had shifted completely. Emergency broadcasts had replaced regular programming. The company executives who'd been on site for inspection were suddenly arranging for immediate extraction via helicopter. They claimed it was a routine schedule change, but their faces told a different story. They knew something we didn't. Dave showed me a video his brother sent from Chicago. People running through streets, attacking anything that moved. The media called it mass hysteria. We didn't have a name for it yet. The video cut off abruptly with screaming. Dave tried calling his brother back, but the call wouldn't connect. By noon, half the crew was trying to reach family members. Those who got through heard stories of chaos, of violence spreading through neighborhoods like wildfire. Ryan's sister stopped responding to texts. Dave's wife called in hysterics, saying something was happening in their apartment building. People were attacking each other. The call dropped before she could say more. The rig manager gathered everyone for an emergency meeting. His face was ashen as he explained that the company was ordering immediate evacuation. We were to leave all equipment, take only essential personal items, and report to the helipad in 30 minutes. When someone asked why, he just shook his head and said, "It's not safe anymore, anywhere." That's when the first official emergency broadcast came through. The voice was mechanical, rehearsed, but you could hear the strain beneath the professional veneer. Major population centers were experiencing unprecedented civil unrest. Quarantine measures had failed in multiple locations. Citizens were advised to avoid all urban areas and stay in their homes. The broadcast cut out mid-sentence. When it resumed, it was a different voice, less composed. "This is not a drill," they said. "Infected individuals are extremely dangerous and should not be approached under any circumstances. If you encounter someone exhibiting unusual behavior, do not attempt to help them. Leave the area immediately." Panic set in after that. People were shoving each other to get to the helipad, grabbing whatever they could carry. I watched my colleagues transform from professional adults into frightened animals in the span of minutes. Something in my gut told me to focus, to think. While everyone was pushing and shouting to get on the helicopters, I made a different choice. I went to the emergency storage and grabbed one of the disaster kits. Standard procedure for offshore installations. Water purification tablets, first aid supplies, emergency rations, flare gun, multi-tool. Basic survival gear. The hesitation, that moment of preparation instead of panic, saved my life. By the time I made it to the helipad, the first helicopter was already lifting off. Overloaded with people and their bags. The pilot looked strained, sweating despite the cool air. I was waiting for the second chopper when I noticed something odd about one of the workers waiting with me. His skin had a grayish tint, and he kept scratching at his neck where an angry red welt was forming. The helicopter never made it more than 50 feet off the ground. Something was wrong with the pilot. He was twitching, scratching at his neck. When he turned to look at the passengers, his eyes were completely white. The screams lasted less than a minute. The helicopter tilted, then plummeted into the water with a crash that seemed to echo forever. No one moved. We all just stood there, staring at the ripples spreading across the water's surface. Then the man with the gray skin and the neck welt made a sound. Not a word, not a scream. A guttural, humpy growl that didn't sound human at all. Before anyone could react, he lunged at the woman standing next to him and bit into her shoulder like he was starving. Everything happened so fast after that. People running, screaming. The infected worker attacking anyone he could reach. Blood everywhere. I backed away slowly, then turned and ran for the maintenance building. Locked the door behind me. Tried to process what I'd just seen. Through the window, I watched as more workers began to change. The woman who'd been bitten collapsed, convulsing. Within minutes, she was back on her feet, but her movements were wrong. Jerky. Predatory. Her eyes had the same milky whiteness. One by one, the infection spread through the crowd. I stayed in that maintenance building for hours, paralyzed by fear and disbelief. The rational part of my brain kept insisting this couldn't be happening. Infections don't work this way. People don't transform into monsters in minutes. But the evidence was right in front of me, hunting down the last uninfected workers on the rig. When darkness fell, I knew I had to move. The extraction point at the shore would be compromised if what happened here was happening everywhere. I needed to find a safer location, gather more supplies, come up with a plan. I was checking my supplies when I dropped my wrench. The sound wasn't even that loud, but it drew immediate attention. An infected worker, who had been wandering aimlessly, suddenly turned toward the maintenance building. His head snapped in my direction like a hunting dog catching a scent. That's when I noticed something strange. He was looking right at me through the window, but when I froze completely, he seemed to lose track of me, even though I was in plain sight. I held my breath, didn't move a muscle. After a moment, he turned away, distracted by some other sound in the distance. It was my first clue about how they functioned. They hunted by sound, not sight. Their vision seemed impaired, but their hearing was unnaturally sharp. I tested this theory carefully over the next few hours, making small noises from different positions. Each time, the infected would respond instantly to the sound, but struggled to locate me if I remained still afterward. Years of working underwater taught me to think methodically, even in crisis. Step 1. Secure immediate area. Step 2. Assess resources. Step 3. Establish communication. Except there was no one left to communicate with. I was alone on an oil rig, surrounded by the infected, with limited supplies and no rescue coming. I modified my welding gear to create makeshift tools for protection. The torch itself could be a last resort defense. I fashioned sound dampening for my boots using insulation material from the walls. Every movement had to be calculated, silent. Before attempting to leave the maintenance building, I needed to confirm my theories about the infected. I threw a wrench as far as I could across the yard. Every single one of them turned and ran toward it. That's when I knew for certain they hunt by sound, not sight. My next discovery was more personal and nearly cost me my life. I encountered an infected worker in a narrow corridor. No way around him, no way to distract him without alerting others. I held perfectly still, barely breathing. He came within inches of me, close enough that I could detect an unusual odor from him. His hazy eyes moved past me several times. He could sense I was there somehow, but couldn't quite locate me without sound. Eventually he moved on, distracted by something else. That encounter taught me the limits of their perception and gave me the confidence to move among them when necessary. Silent movement became my first survival skill. By the morning of the second day, I knew I needed to leave the rig and head inland. The offshore facility had limited supplies, and there was no guarantee that help would ever come. I gathered everything useful I could carry, created a series of noise distractions, and made my way to the dock where the smaller maintenance boats were kept. The journey to shore was tense but uneventful. The infected seemed disoriented by water, reluctant to enter it. I took that as another piece of useful information. Water might provide some safety, or at least a barrier. What I found on shore confirmed my worst fears. The infection had spread rapidly through the nearby communities. Streets were abandoned except for the infected, wandering in search of prey. I observed them from a distance, noting how they interacted with the environment and each other. They showed no interest in animals, only humans. They didn't eat or drink that I could see. They just hunted. I found a military blockade on the access road, 5 vehicles, all abandoned. No bodies, though, not a single one. That should have told me something important about what we were dealing with. Whatever was happening, the military couldn't contain it. And the bodies of the fallen didn't stay down. My immediate priority was to find medical supplies and more substantial food than the emergency rations I'd brought. A small local clinic seemed like the logical choice, less likely to be overrun than a major hospital, but still well-stocked. The clinic parking lot was chaos. Abandoned cars, some with doors still open. Dark stains on the pavement. The building itself was dark, many of its windows broken. I approached cautiously, using every technique I'd learned about silent movement. Inside, the scene was worse than I expected. Examination rooms showed signs of hasty abandonment. Medical equipment lay scattered across floors, and in one secured room, I found something that chilled me to the bone. Patients secured in beds, showing signs of infection. Some were still recognizably human but clearly affected. Others had completed the change, struggling against their restraints, heads turning toward me the moment I made the slightest sound. I was backing away from this disturbing scene when a hand grabbed my shoulder. I nearly cried out in surprise, which would have been fatal. But the hand belonged to a woman in scrubs hiding in a supply closet. Elaine, the first survivor I'd encountered since the outbreak began. She'd been treating patients when it happened. Said it started with heightened hearing. Patients complaining about sounds no one else could hear. Then paranoia, aggression, and finally, a complete behavioral change. The whole process took less than 2 hours. Elaine had hidden when her colleagues began acting erratically. She'd been in that closet for nearly a day, afraid to make a sound. Trust is a luxury in this new world, but so is going it alone. After finding Elaine in that clinic supply closet, we both recognized we had better chances of survival together than separate. She had medical knowledge I lacked, and I had survival skills she needed. Our first hour together was tense, both of us suspicious and frightened, communicating in whispers so low we could barely hear each other. Elaine shared everything she knew about the infection from a medical perspective. She'd observed the progression firsthand in dozens of patients before hiding. The first symptom was always auditory hypersensitivity. Patients would become distressed by normal ambient sounds, claiming they were unbearably loud. Then came fever, disorientation, and an almost primal aggression. The final stage happened rapidly, complete behavioral change and the development of the milky eye film I'd observed. They're not dead, she told me. Whatever this is, it's hijacking the brain, not killing it. Their vital signs remain stable throughout the transformation. Heart rate elevates, but doesn't stop. That information changed my understanding of what we were facing. Not reanimated corpses from horror movies, but living humans whose minds had been overwhelmed by something else. Something that prioritized hunting and spreading above all other functions. We established 3 simple rules between us. Minimize sound, travel at night, and always have an escape route. The first challenge was developing a way to communicate silently. We created basic hand signals for immediate needs: danger, stop, go, hide. Within hours, we had a rudimentary sign language that allowed us to coordinate without speaking. Our priority was moving away from the clinic before nightfall. Too many infected had gathered in the area, drawn by earlier commotion. Elaine suggested we head toward less populated areas. The infections seemed to spread fastest in dense urban environments. The rural countryside might offer better chances. Before leaving, we gathered as many medical supplies as we could carry. Antibiotics, bandages, pain relievers. Elaine insisted on taking a stethoscope, not just for medical purposes, but because it could amplify quiet sounds, potentially allowing us to detect infected before they detected us. We set out as dusk approached, moving through back alleys and yards to avoid open streets. The suburb we entered had been evacuated in a hurry. Houses stood with doors open, cars abandoned in driveways, toys scattered across lawns. The signs of interrupted lives were everywhere. In one house, we found walls covered with bizarre equations, and the words "they here d-e-s-i-j-n-a-l" scrawled over and over. At the time, I thought it was just the ramblings of someone losing their mind. I was wrong. Those words would come back to haunt me later. We observed something disturbing about infected family units. They stayed together, even after transformation. An infected family would hunt as a pack, moving with a coordination that suggested some form of communication between them. It wasn't random. There was a pattern to their movements, almost like they were receiving directions from somewhere. Moving through these neighborhoods required absolute silence and patience. We'd watch infected patterns for minutes before attempting to cross open spaces. When we needed supplies, we'd select houses carefully, observing them first to ensure they were clear. One home yielded maps of the county and state, invaluable for planning our route. Another provided backpacks to better organize our supplies. Each successful incursion built our confidence, but also increased the risk of making a fatal mistake. During our second night, as we were making our way through a wooded area between neighborhoods, we heard a distinctive sound, a soft whistle, deliberately produced. Human communication, not infected noise. We froze, uncertain whether to investigate or avoid potential contact. The whistle came again, more urgent. Against my better judgment, we moved toward it, weapons ready. In a hunting tree stand, we found a teenage boy who introduced himself as Jake. He'd been stuck there for nearly 2 days, afraid to climb down because infected kept passing beneath his position. Jake was a local, out hunting when the outbreak hit his town. He'd witnessed the initial chaos from his elevated position and made the wise decision to stay put. His observations about infected behavior in the forest proved invaluable. He'd noticed they moved differently in natural settings, more coordinated, almost like they were communicating with each other through subtle means. The deer knew something was wrong before people did, Jake told us. All the wildlife just started running in the same direction, away from town. Then I started seeing people acting weird on the forest paths. Walking stiff, heads tilted like they were listening for something. That's when I climbed up and stayed put. Jake also confirmed something I'd suspected. The infected were more active at night. During daylight hours, they seemed slower, less coordinated. They didn't shut down completely, but their responses were delayed. This information helped us refine our travel strategy. We would rest during daylight in secure locations, then move under cover of darkness when necessary. With Jake now part of our group, we had the advantage of someone who knew the local terrain intimately. He guided us to a ranger station he knew was rarely staffed, where we found additional supplies in a vehicle, an old Jeep parked behind the building. The keys were still in the ignition. Having transportation would significantly expand our range, but also introduce new risks. Engine noise would attract infected from miles around. We spent hours modifying the vehicle, using materials from the ranger station to muffle the engine and exhaust as much as possible. We removed the doors to eliminate the sound of them closing. We wrapped metal parts in cloth to prevent rattling. Everything was a potential noise hazard. Our first attempt at driving was nerve-wracking. We moved at a crawl, barely above walking pace, engine throttled down to the minimum required to keep it running. Even with our modifications, the sound seemed deafening after days of enforced quiet. We held our breath, expecting infected to swarm us from all directions. They came, but not immediately. The slow approach gave us time to establish a perimeter watch system. Jake would scout ahead on foot, using hand signals to direct us around concentrations of infected. Elaine monitored our flanks while I drove. The system worked well until mechanical failure intervened. We'd been traveling for perhaps an hour when the engine belt snapped with a crack that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the silence. Within seconds, we heard them coming, dozens of infected, all converging on our position from different directions. We abandoned the vehicle, grabbing only essential supplies, and ran for the nearest building, a small convenience store with metal security gates. Inside, we barricaded the doors and windows as quickly and quietly as possible. The infected surrounded the building within minutes, pounding on walls and doors. They knew we were inside, but couldn't pinpoint our exact location as long as we remained silent. For hours, we sat motionless in the dark store, barely breathing. Eventually, their interest waned as other sounds in the environment drew them away. By morning, only a few stragglers remained, wandering aimlessly around the building. While searching the store for supplies, Jake found something potentially valuable, a functioning emergency radio in what appeared to be an abandoned police car parked behind the building. The officer had apparently stopped for supplies when the outbreak hit. We found his body nearby, gun still in hand. He'd chosen a quick end rather than transformation. The radio gave us our first broader understanding of the situation. Most channels were dead air, but occasionally we'd catch fragments of emergency broadcasts or survivor communications. The picture they painted was grim. Major cities had fallen within hours. Military containment efforts had collapsed almost immediately. Government officials had retreated to secure locations, abandoning most population centers. One broadcast was particularly chilling. All civilian evacuation efforts are suspended. Military resources are being redirected to secure zones Alpha through Echo. Remaining citizens are advised to shelter in place and minimize all noise. Then nothing but static. The message was clear. No help was coming. We were on our own. Between radio transmissions, we caught mentions of safe zones in remote areas. Places where natural barriers or military presence had managed to hold back the infected tide. The mountains to the west came up repeatedly. Their difficult terrain seemed to slow infected movement and concentration. That information gave us a destination and a purpose beyond day-to-day survival. If we could reach the mountain-safe zones, we might find other survivors, better resources, perhaps even organized resistance. The journey would be dangerous, but staying in place meant eventual discovery. We spent that day planning our route using the maps we'd collected. Jake's local knowledge proved invaluable for identifying back roads and potential safe houses along the way. Elaine inventoried our medical supplies, setting aside those most critical for trauma treatment. I focused on transportation alternatives, knowing our modified Jeep was now useless. The convenience store provided an unexpected resource: bicycles. Silent transportation that could move faster than walking, with no fuel requirements. We found 3 basic models that could be adjusted to fit each of us. Not ideal for rough terrain, but perfect for quiet movement on roads and trails. Before leaving, we conducted a thorough scout of the surrounding area. The infected seemed to have dispersed after losing interest in the store, but we needed to be certain of our exit route. Jake climbed to the roof for a better vantage point while Elaine and I checked the immediate perimeter. What we discovered was concerning. Though the area directly around the store was relatively clear, we could see infected gathering in larger groups about half a mile away. They weren't moving toward us, but their concentration suggested some form of organization or purpose. They appeared to be listening for something, heads tilted in the same direction. We decided to delay our departure until nightfall, hoping the infected concentration would disperse. During those waiting hours, we refined our silent communication system and practiced quick, quiet mounting and dismounting of the bicycles. Every action had to become automatic, requiring minimal thought under pressure. As darkness fell, the infected group began to move away from our location, drawn by something we couldn't perceive. We seized the opportunity, slipping out through the back of the store and onto a narrow residential street. Our bicycle convoy moved in single file, maintaining enough distance between riders to avoid collision, but close enough to maintain visual contact. The first few miles passed without incident. We kept to back roads, avoiding the main highway where abandoned vehicles and potentially higher concentrations of infected would make passage difficult. Jake led the way, his hunter's instincts guiding us around danger. Then we heard it, a distress signal, a single human voice calling out repeatedly from a nearby house. The voice was mailed, desperate, breaking the cardinal rule of survival: silence. We hesitated, caught between self-preservation and the human instinct to help. Elaine made the decision for us, veering toward the source of the calls. I followed reluctantly, with Jake taking up rear guard. The calls led us to a small suburban home with its garage door partially open. Inside, we found an elderly man trapped beneath a fallen shelf. His leg was badly injured, possibly broken. He introduced himself as Oscar, a retired submarine engineer who had been scavenging supplies when the shelf collapsed. He'd been pinned for hours, finally resorting to calls for help as darkness fell. He knew the risk he was taking, but had no other options. The noise had already attracted attention. We could hear infected approaching from several directions. We worked quickly to free Oscar, using a car jack from a nearby vehicle to lift the shelf. Elaine administered emergency first aid while Jake and I prepared to defend our position if necessary. The first infected reached the garage just as we were getting Oscar onto one of our bicycles. I had to make a split-second decision, abandon the bike and Oscar, or create a diversion. I chose the latter, using my flare gun to send a bright signal arcing away from our position. The light and sound immediately drew the infected away, giving us the opening we needed to escape. With Oscar sharing Elaine's bicycle, we moved more slowly than before, but still managed to put distance between ourselves and the hunting packs. Oscar directed us toward a hardware store he'd been using as a base before his accident. According to him, it was well stocked and defensible, with multiple exit routes and a secure storage room. The hardware store proved to be exactly as Oscar described. Located on the edge of a small commercial district, it had thick concrete walls, metal security gates, and a loading dock that could serve as an emergency exit. Oscar had already begun fortifying the location before his accident, installing makeshift alarms and barriers. Most importantly, Oscar understood silence as a survival strategy better than anyone I'd met. He'd been a submarine engineer in the Navy before retiring. The discipline of silent running was ingrained in him. He'd already soundproofed the store's back room using insulation materials from the shelves. On a submarine, sound discipline is life or death. He explained in a whisper. An enemy can hear you from miles away if you're not careful. These things are no different. Sound is how they hunt. Oscar's military background also gave him insights into potential government response. He confirmed what we'd heard on the radio, that official evacuation efforts had been abandoned in favor of securing limited zones. The mountain regions were indeed being established as safe havens, but reaching them would mean traversing areas with heavy infected concentration. That night, for the first time since the outbreak, we allowed ourselves to rest properly. With the store secured and soundproofed, we established a watch rotation that let each person get several hours of uninterrupted sleep. Oscar's leg required more treatment than Elaine could provide with our limited supplies, but she managed to stabilize it and reduce his pain enough for him to function. The hardware store offered resources we hadn't had access to before. Tools that could be modified into weapons or utility items, building materials for better barricades, even communication devices in the form of two-way radios used by the store staff. The radios had limited range, but would allow us to coordinate if we became separated. Oscar taught us how to create silent alarm systems using fishing line and suspended metal objects. When triggered, they would alert us to movement without making enough noise to attract infected. We installed these around the store's perimeter, giving us early warning of approach. We spent the following day improving our defenses and planning the next leg of our journey. Oscar couldn't travel in his condition, but he insisted we take supplies from his stockpile. He'd been gathering materials for weeks, anticipating a situation exactly like the one we now faced. Among his supplies was something particularly valuable, a detailed topographical map of the mountain region we were targeting. Unlike the basic road maps we've been using, this showed elevation changes, water sources, and terrain features that could either help or hinder our progress. Jake used the map to identify a potential route that would avoid major population centers while providing access to water and natural shelter. The journey would take at least a week on bicycles, longer if we encountered significant obstacles. We began sorting supplies for the trip, prioritizing items with the highest survival value relative to weight. During this planning, I noticed something concerning about Oscar. Despite his military discipline and survival knowledge, he seemed increasingly distracted. Several times I caught him pressing his hearing aids, frowning as if in pain or confusion. When questioned, he dismissed it as battery issues, but his expression suggested something more troubling. Sometimes I pick up strange frequencies, he admitted eventually. Voices that aren't there. Been happening since the outbreak started. Thought it was interference at first, but now I'm not so sure. His comment reminded me of the writing we found on the walls of that house. "T-A-H-Y here, thee sag now." I shared this with Oscar, whose face darkened with recognition. The infected move like they're receiving instructions, he said. Coordinated, purposeful. In submarine warfare, we call that command guidance. Something's directing them. And sometimes, I think I can hear it too. Oscar's comment about hearing something directing the infected haunted me through the night. We'd all observed how the infected seemed to move with purpose, coordinating in ways that seemed impossible without communication. but the idea that they were receiving instructions from some central source was far more terrifying than random aggression. That night, our relatively secure position in the hardware store allowed us to establish proper watch rotations. 2 hours on, 6 hours off. Real sleep for the first time since the outbreak began. I took the first shift, keeping vigil near the front of the store where I could monitor our perimeter alarms without making noise. Around midnight, I noticed Oscar was awake despite not being on watch. He was sitting in the corner, repeatedly adjusting his hearing aids with a troubled expression. When he saw me watching, he motioned me over with a careful gesture. "It's getting stronger," he whispered so quietly I could barely hear him. The signal. Clearer now. Almost like words, but not quite. More like feelings being pushed into my head. I asked him what the feelings were telling him to do. His answer chilled me. To join them. To stop fighting. To become part of something larger. He removed his hearing aids and placed them in my hand. "Keep these away from me while I sleep. I don't trust myself with them anymore." I pocketed the devices, unsure whether Oscar's perception was real or the product of stress and exhaustion. Either way, his distress was genuine. I promised to watch over him and suggested he try to rest. Just before dawn, as Elaine was taking over the watch from Jake, we heard vehicles approaching. Not the random sounds of abandoned cars being disturbed by infected, but the purposeful movement of functioning transport under human control. We doused our small light and took defensive positions near windows where we could observe without being seen. 3 military-style trucks rolled slowly down the street, spotlights sweeping methodically across buildings. Each vehicle had armed personnel in protective gear, standing in turret positions. They weren't infected. Their movements were too coordinated, too human. But they weren't behaving like rescuers either. They moved with predatory caution, weapons ready. We debated whether to signal them. The presence of organized military suggested government control still existed somewhere, possibly connected to the safe zones we'd heard mentioned. But their aggressive posture made us hesitant. Oscar made the decision for us. "Those aren't regular army," he whispered. "Private military contractors, mercenaries. See the lack of insignia? They're hunting, not rescuing." We remained hidden as the convoy passed, then continued up the street before turning west. Their presence raised new questions. Who were they working for? What were they seeking? And most importantly, did their appearance mean organized society still functioned somewhere? When full daylight came, we held a council to discuss our next steps. Oscar's leg was improving, but not enough for rapid travel. The mercenary presence suggested both danger and opportunity. Danger from their unknown intentions. Opportunity in that they must have a base with resources and possible connection to larger survivor groups. We decided to split our objectives. Jake would follow the mercenary convoy at a safe distance to determine their destination, while Aline and I would gather more supplies for our eventual journey to the mountains. Oscar would remain at the hardware store, continuing to monitor radio frequencies for useful information. Before separating, we synchronized our two-way radios and established check-in protocols and emergency signals. Jake would return by nightfall regardless of what he discovered. If he failed to return, we would assume the worst and proceed with our mountain plan immediately. Elaine and I set out on bicycles, targeting a nearby pharmacy that Oscar had marked on our map but hadn't yet explored. We moved cautiously through residential areas, avoiding main roads where the mercenary convoy had traveled. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with no signs of infected activity. Their absence was more unsettling than their presence would have been. The pharmacy had been looted but not completely emptied. We found antibiotics, pain relievers, and wound care supplies hidden behind fallen shelves and in storage areas overlooked by less thorough scavengers. Elaine recognized medications that would help with Oscar's recovery and improve our overall medical readiness. While Elaine sorted through medical supplies, I explored the adjacent grocery store. Most food was gone, but I discovered a storage room with emergency ration kits, apparently intended for disaster response. Compact, high-calorie, long shelf life. Ideal for our planned mountain journey. As we were preparing to return to the hardware store, we heard a sound that froze us in place, children's voices. Living children, not infected. Somewhere nearby, young survivors were talking to each other, apparently unaware of the danger their noise created. We followed the sounds cautiously to a daycare center across the parking lot. Through a window, we could see 3 children, none older than 6, playing quietly with toys. No adults were visible. The building's heavy doors had protected them, but they would eventually need to leave for supplies. Elaine and I debated our options. Taking responsibility for children would drastically reduce our mobility and survival chances, but leaving them was morally unthinkable. While we were discussing this, a woman emerged from a back room of the daycare. She was clearly exhausted but alert, armed with a sharpened piece of metal, a protector. We approached carefully, using hand signals to show we weren't threats. The woman was understandably suspicious, but the presence of Elaine, a medical professional, eventually convinced her to open communication. She introduced herself as Sarah, a daycare worker who had been sheltering with the children since the outbreak. Parents had never returned to collect them. Sarah had kept the children alive through quick thinking and strict noise discipline. She taught them a game called Whisper Only, turning survival necessity into something the children could understand and follow. Food and water were running critically low, though. Without help, they had days at most. After a brief conference, Elaine and I offered to escort Sarah and the children back to the hardware store. Oscar would likely object to expanding our group with vulnerable members, but we couldn't leave them to slowly starve. Sarah agreed immediately, recognizing the offer as their best chance. Transporting 3 young children silently through infected territory presented unique challenges. We fashioned carriers from backpacks and cloth, allowing Elaine and Sarah to each carry a child while cycling. The oldest child, a girl named Lily, could ride on the back of my bicycle. We practiced silent mounting and dismounting, and taught the children an urgent hand signal that meant freeze and hold your breath. Our return journey was tense but successful. We encountered only scattered infected, easily avoided with careful timing. The children, understanding the gravity of the situation even at their young age, maintained perfect silence. Lily, holding onto my back as we rode, would occasionally squeeze my shoulder twice, their signal for "I'm scared but okay." We arrived at the hardware store to find Oscar agitated. Jake had returned early with disturbing news. The mercenary convoy had established a checkpoint on the main highway leading toward the mountains. They were stopping and searching all survivors attempting to travel west, separating groups according to criteria Jake couldn't determine. More concerning, Oscar had intercepted radio communications, suggesting the mercenaries were looking for immune carriers among survivors. What that meant, and why they wanted such people, remained unclear. Our group now numbered 8, myself, Elaine, Jake, Oscar, Sarah, and 3 children. The hardware store could accommodate us comfortably, but our supply consumption would accelerate dramatically. We needed a better long-term solution. That evening, we held another council. Oscar surprised me by welcoming the children without complaint. Military pragmatism apparently included a soft spot for innocent lives. He even produced small candies from his personal supplies, earning immediate trust from our youngest survivors. The mercenary checkpoint complicated our mountain plans. The highway route Jake had scouted was now effectively blocked. We would need an alternative path, likely through more difficult terrain. Oscar's topographical map became our most valuable resource as we identified potential routes. Jake suggested a hunting trail he knew that connected to fire access roads in the foothills. It would add days to our journey but avoid the checkpoint entirely. The route would require crossing a series of small valleys and a river, but offered natural cover and potential hunting opportunities. Sarah provided unexpected value to our planning. Before working at the daycare, she had been an avid hiker and knew several mountain paths that didn't appear on standard maps. Combined with Jake's hunting knowledge, her experience gave us a viable alternative route. The children, meanwhile, adapted to their new environment with remarkable resilience. Lily appointed herself their leader, ensuring the younger ones followed our noise rules. She shadowed me whenever possible, apparently having decided I was her personal protector. Our expanded group necessitated better organization. We established clear roles based on skills and capabilities. Elaine and Sarah focused on care and education for the children. Jake and I handled security and resource gathering. Oscar, despite his limited mobility, became our communications and intelligence specialist, monitoring radio frequencies and analyzing patterns in infected movement. The following day, Jake and I embarked on a more ambitious supply run, targeting a sporting goods store several miles away. Such a location would have camping equipment, weather-appropriate clothing, and potentially weapons useful for our mountain journey. We traveled light on bicycles, planning to return with trailer attachments for hauling supplies. The journey took us closer to the area where we'd seen mercenary activity, requiring extra caution. We used natural cover wherever possible, freezing in place when vehicles or infected approached. The sporting goods store had been partially looted, but still contained valuable items overlooked by less experienced scavengers. We found high-quality backpacks, water purification systems, cold weather gear, and a compound bow with arrows that would allow Jake to hunt silently. While gathering supplies, we overheard voices from the store's back office. Human voices engaged in normal conversation, not the growls of infected. We approached cautiously, weapons ready. Inside the office, we found two men sorting through boxes of ammunition. They were clearly survivors, not infected or mercenaries. They reacted with alarm when they spotted us, reaching for weapons. I raised my hand slowly, signaling peaceful intentions. After tense moments of mutual assessment, they lowered their guns. They introduced themselves as Marcus and Daniel, former police officers who had been traversing the area in search of other survivors. Marcus explained they were part of a larger group hiding in a warehouse about 5 miles north. They had organized a community of about 20 survivors, including families with children. Their group had established security protocols and resource-sharing systems that had kept them alive since the outbreak. When I mentioned our plan to reach the mountain-safe zones, Marcus exchanged a significant look with Daniel. They had heard similar rumors but also troubling information about what happened to survivors who reached the checkpoints. They're separating people, Marcus said, testing blood samples. Anyone who shows certain markers gets taken away to some facility deeper in the mountains. The rest get turned away or worse. Their information aligned with what Jake had observed and Oscar had heard on radio intercepts. It seemed the government, or whatever remained of it, was conducting some form of selection process, possibly related to immunity or resistance to the infection. I asked if their group had considered joining us in attempting to bypass the checkpoints and reach the mountains independently. Marcus hesitated, then made a surprising offer. Instead of us going to them, or them joining us, he suggested combining our knowledge and resources for mutual benefit, but maintaining separate locations for security. Multiple small groups are harder to track than one large one, he explained. We can coordinate, share intelligence, create a network. Safety in numbers doesn't have to mean physical proximity. The proposal made strategic sense. We agreed to establish communication protocols and regular meeting points for information exchange. Before parting ways, Marcus provided us with a hand-drawn map, showing the locations of infected concentrations and mercenary patrols they had observed. Jake and I returned to the hardware store with our supplies and the news of potential allies. The group received the information with mixed reactions. Oscar was immediately supportive, seeing the tactical advantages of a wider network. Elaine was cautiously optimistic. Sarah expressed concern about trusting strangers, but acknowledged the benefits of additional adult protection for the children. That night, as I took my watch shift, I found Lily awake and sitting quietly near the front window. She motioned me over and pointed outside where an infected was wandering past our building. What struck me was how the creature moved, purposefully, head tilted as if listening for directions. They were looking for something specific, Lily whispered. Not just people, something else. Children often perceive patterns adults miss, their minds not yet trained to filter information according to established expectations. I'd asked her what she thought they were seeking. The quiet ones, she said. The people who don't make noise in their heads. Her comment reminded me of Oscar's experience with his hearing aids and the signal he claimed to detect. I asked Lily if she ever heard strange sounds or voices since the outbreak began. She shook her head. But sometimes I feel pushing, she said, pressing her small hands against her temples. Like someone trying to open a door in my head. The implications of her statement were disturbing. If the infection spread through some form of signal or transmission that affected the brain, could some people be naturally resistant? Could that explain what the mercenaries were searching for among survivors? I shared this conversation with Elaine during our watch change. Her medical background allowed her to make connections I hadn't considered. There are documented cases of people with natural immunity to certain pathogens, she said. If this infection affects neural pathways, particularly those related to auditory processing, individuals with certain neurological configurations might be resistant. Like children? I asked, thinking of Lily's comment. Possibly. Children's brains are still developing, especially areas related to higher processing. They might experience the signal differently or be able to resist it longer. This theory gave new urgency to our plans. If the children in our group had natural resistance to the infection, they might be specifically valuable to whoever was directing the mercenaries. We needed to be even more cautious about exposure and movement. The next morning, Oscar confirmed our growing suspicions. He had intercepted another radio transmission, this one clearer than previous ones. The mercenaries had been instructed to prioritize capturing children and individuals who demonstrated atypical response profiles when exposed to infected. We accelerated our preparation timeline. What had been a plan to leave in several days became immediate necessity. Jake and I performed final supply runs while Elaine and Sarah prepared the children for travel. Oscar, though still limited by his injury, insisted on coming with us rather than staying behind. "Whatever's happening," he said, "I want to face it with people I trust, not wait for it to find me alone." By evening, we were ready to move. Our bicycles had been modified with small trailers for supplies and the youngest children. We have secured the hardware store in a way that would make it appear untouched to casual inspection, hopefully preserving it as a fallback position if needed. As darkness fell, we gathered for a final briefing. Our route would take us northwest through residential areas, then into progressively less developed terrain. We would travel only at night initially, hiding during daylight hours. Once in the foothills, we would switch to daytime movement when infected activity seemed reduced. Just as we were preparing to leave, our perimeter alarm triggered, the subtle sound of fishing line drawing taut against metal. Someone or something was approaching the rear of the building. We doused our light and took defensive positions, weapons ready. Through the back window, we saw shadows moving with purpose toward our loading dock. Too coordinated to be infected, too cautious to be friendly. The mercenaries had found us. The mercenaries had tactical gear, night vision, and coordination we couldn't match. Direct confrontation would end badly. I signaled to the others to hold position while I assessed our options. The hardware store had a ventilation system that connected to the roof. A tight squeeze for adults, but manageable. It would be our emergency exit if the loading dock was compromised. I counted 6 mercenaries approaching in standard breach formation. Their weapons were ready but not raised, suggesting they weren't certain the building was occupied. They might be conducting a routine search rather than acting on specific intelligence about our presence. Oscar moved beside me, watching the approaching threat with professional assessment. He pointed to their communication gear, then to his ear, indicating they were receiving instructions. He mouthed a single word, "Signal." The team split into pairs, covering different entry points. We had minutes at most before they found a way in. I gathered everyone in the center of the store and outlined our escape plan in urgent whispers. The children would go through the ventilation shaft first, followed by Sarah and Elaine. Jake, Oscar, and I would provide delayed tactics, then follow. Lally clutched my arm, her eyes wide but determined. I squeezed her hand reassuringly and helped her toward the vent opening where Jake had already removed the cover. The youngest children went first, small enough to move quickly through the narrow space. Sarah followed, guiding them from behind. Just as Elaine was entering the shaft, we heard glass breaking at the front of the store. They were in. I motioned for Jake to proceed with Oscar, while I created a diversion. Oscar shook his head firmly, pressing something into my hand, his hearing aids. "They detect these," he whispered. "Technology reacting to their signal. That's how they found us. Take them away from here." Before I could argue, Oscar moved toward the front of the store, deliberately making noise to draw attention away from our escape route. I wanted to stop him, but there wasn't time. Jake was already helping Elaine through the ventilation shaft. I had to ensure everyone else got out safely. I followed Jake into the shaft, the confined space, scraping against my shoulders. The metal creaked under our weight, threatening to give away our position. Behind us, I heard Oscar engaging the mercenaries, his voice strong and commanding. He was buying us time with his life. We emerged onto the roof to find everyone waiting in the shadow of an air conditioning unit. Below, vehicles were positioned around the building, but the rear alley remained unguarded. We used ropes from our supplies to lower the children first, then the adults. I was the last to descend, constantly watching for signs of pursuit. From inside the building came the unmistakable sound of conflict, shouting, then a single gunshot. Oscar had made his choice. There was nothing we could do for him now except ensure his sacrifice wasn't wasted. We moved quickly into the alley, then through a series of narrow passages between buildings. Our bicycles and most supplies were still in the hardware store, inaccessible. We had only what we carried, some food, basic medical supplies, and weapons. Our carefully planned journey had become an improvised flight. For hours, we navigated the dark streets, avoiding open areas and main roads where mercenary vehicles might patrol. The children, sensing the gravity of our situation, maintained perfect silence despite their fear. Lally stayed close to me, often helping guide the younger ones through difficult passages. By dawn, we had reached the outskirts of town, finding temporary shelter in an abandoned barn. The structure was weather-beaten but solid, with multiple exit points and a loft that offered observation positions. We established a watch rotation while the others attempted to rest. Taking inventory of our remaining supplies was disheartening. Without the equipment we'd left behind, our chances of reaching the mountains had diminished significantly. We had enough food for perhaps 3 days at reduced rations. Water purification tablets, but no containers larger than personal bottles. Basic medical supplies, but none of the specialized medications Elaine had gathered. Most concerning was Oscar's warning about his hearing aids. If the mercenaries could detect certain technologies, what else might they be tracking? Our two-way radios, while essential for coordination, might be compromising our position. We decided to use them only in emergencies, relying on visual contact and our established silent communication methods otherwise. During my watch shift, I examined the hearing aids Oscar had given me. They were standard medical devices, nothing outwardly special. Yet he had been convinced they somehow interacted with whatever signal was controlling the infected. I wrapped them carefully and placed them in an inner pocket, uncertain whether to discard them or preserve them as potential evidence. As the others slept, I used the time to think through our new reality. The mercenaries were clearly hunting specific individuals, those with potential immunity or resistance to the infection. Oscar's theory about technology detection suggested they had sophisticated tracking methods, and they were organized enough to establish checkpoints and conduct systematic sweeps of the area. All this pointed to a level of remaining infrastructure and purpose that went beyond simple survival. Someone with resources was directing these operations toward a specific goal. Understanding that goal might be as important to our survival as reaching the mountains. When Jake relieved me from watch, I shared these thoughts with him. His hunter's perspective offered a different angle. If they're tracking certain people, they must have a way to identify them beyond just technology, he said. Like predators identifying the weakest prey in a herd, they can somehow tell who's affected by the signal and who isn't. I mentioned Lily's comment about quiet ones and people who don't make noise in their heads. Jake nodded thoughtfully. The little ones are more tuned in than we give them credit for, he said. Maybe that's why children are a priority target. They can sense things we can't. When everyone was awake, we held a council to determine our next steps. Without transportation, reaching the mountains would take weeks on foot, especially with young children. We needed to find vehicles, supplies, and a safer route away from mercenary patrols. Sarah suggested a destination I hadn't considered, a summer camp where she had worked, located about 15 miles northwest. It was remote enough to have possibly escaped both infection and mercenary attention, yet close enough to reach on foot within 2 days. Most importantly, it would have supplies specifically suited for children and possibly vehicles used for camp operations. The decision was made. We would rest through the day, then begin moving toward the camp at dusk. Jake would scout ahead while the rest of us moved as a unit, with Elaine and me protecting the flanks and Sarah guiding the children. As we prepared to move out, Lily approached me with a serious expression. She held out her small hand, revealing a crude compass made from a magnetized needle and bottle cap. For finding our way, she said solemnly, my dad showed me how to make it. The needle always points north. I accepted the gift with appropriate gravity, recognizing it as both practically useful and symbolically significant. This child had lost everything, yet maintained not only hope, but a desire to contribute. Her resilience shamed my own darker thoughts. We set out as planned, moving through increasingly rural terrain as afternoon faded to evening. The landscape shifted from suburban developments to scattered farms, then to wooded areas interspersed with fields. Jake ranged ahead, periodically returning to report clear paths or dangers to avoid. The infected were present but scattered in these less populated areas. Their behavior continued to support our observations about sound sensitivity. When we accidentally triggered a noisy response from wildlife, startling birds from a thicket or disturbing small animals in undergrowth, infected would converge on the sound source with unnerving precision. Around midnight, we encountered a situation that tested our growing expertise in infected behavior. A pack of them had surrounded the small farmhouse, responding to some sound inside that we couldn't detect. Their concentration blocked our planned route, forcing us to decide whether to wait for them to disperse or find an alternative path. Waiting carried its own risks. We were exposed with limited cover and young children whose endurance was already stretched. But deviating from our route meant unknown terrain and potential new dangers. Jake suggested a third option, creating a distraction that would draw the infected away temporarily. He had observed that infected would pursue louder sounds over quieter ones, abandoning existing targets when presented with more compelling audio stimuli. Using materials from a nearby shed, He constructed a simple timer device that would eventually cause farm tools to fall from a shelf, creating substantial noise. We positioned the device far enough from our path to draw infected away without endangering our movement. The plan worked perfectly. When the tools clattered to the ground, every infected in the area immediately moved toward the sound, allowing us to slip past the farmhouse undetected. This technique, which Jake dubbed sound baiting, became a valuable addition to our survival strategies. By dawn, we had covered approximately half the distance to the summer camp. We found shelter in an abandoned ranger station, small but defensible. Like our previous rest stop, it offered multiple exit points and observation positions. Unlike the barn, it contained useful supplies, maps, first aid materials, and even some emergency rations. Most valuable were the detailed local area maps showing terrain features, water sources, and structures not marked on standard road maps. Sarah quickly located the summer camp on one of these maps, confirming our direction and identifying potential hazards along our remaining route. While the others established security and prepared food, Elaine pulled me aside for a private conversation. She had been monitoring the children for signs of infection or unusual behavior, particularly in relation to Oscar's theories about the signal. What she had observed was concerning. The youngest ones seemed completely unaffected, she said, but Lily has been exhibiting subtle changes. Periods of disassociation, followed by intense focus. She'll stare into space, then suddenly snap back with observations that seem beyond her years or experience. I asked if she thought Lily was infected or in danger of turning. Elaine shook her head. It's different. Almost like she's developing an awareness of the signal rather than succumbing to it. Like her brain is learning to process it as information rather than a control mechanism. This aligned with my own observations of Lily's increasingly intuitive understanding of infected movement patterns. She had begun anticipating their reactions with uncanny accuracy, often tensing or changing direction seconds before infected appeared or changed behavior. Elaine suggested we monitor all the children closely for similar signs, while continuing to evaluate what these changes might mean for their safety and our strategy. If the mercenaries were indeed hunting those with resistance to the signal, Lily's developing abilities might make her a primary target. After resting through the day, we resumed our journey toward the summer camp. The terrain became more challenging as we entered the foothills, steeper slopes, denser vegetation, fewer clear paths. Progress slowed, especially with the younger children who needed frequent breaks. Jake's scouting became increasingly valuable, identifying game trails and natural passages that made our movement easier. His hunting background allowed him to read the landscape in ways the rest of us couldn't, finding water sources and detecting signs of recent activity, both human and infected. As night fell again, we encountered our first evidence that we were approaching the summer camp, trail markers bearing the camp logo, partially obscured by months of weather and neglect. Sarah recognized them immediately, her pace quickening with renewed purpose. The camp itself came into view shortly before midnight, a collection of rustic buildings arranged around a central common area, surrounded by forest on three sides and backing up to a small lake. From our elevated vantage point, we could see no movement, no lights, no obvious signs of occupation by either infected or survivors. Jake insisted on approaching alone first to ensure the site was truly abandoned. The rest of us waited at a safe distance, ready to retreat if he signaled danger. After what seemed an eternity, he returned with cautiously positive news. The camp appeared empty of both infected and humans, with structures largely intact and potentially useful supplies still present. We entered carefully, moving as a tight unit with the children in the center of our formation. The main lodge contained administrative offices, a dining hall, and common areas. Surrounding it were cabin clusters for campers, activity buildings, and maintenance structures. Everything was dusty and showed signs of hasty abandonment, but there was no blood, no evidence of violence or infection. Most importantly, we found what we had hoped for in the maintenance building: 2 camp vehicles, a pickup truck, and a small bus used for transporting campers. Both had keys conveniently stored on a hook board in the office. Fuel would be the critical question, but even without it, the camp's isolated position offered a defensible location to regroup and plan. We split into teams to secure and explore the camp. Jake and I checked the perimeter and established watch positions. Elaine and Sarah settled the children in the main lodge, where mattresses from the cabins could be arranged for comfortable sleeping. Each team would inventory supplies in different buildings, focusing on essentials: food, medicine, fuel, tools, and communication equipment. The camp exceeded our expectations in many ways. The kitchen contained significant non-perishable food supplies, enough to sustain our group for weeks if carefully rationed. The infirmary was well stocked with basic medical supplies and common medications. Most surprisingly, the maintenance shed contained not only tools but several containers of fuel stored for power generators and vehicles. What we didn't find was equally significant. No bodies. No signs of infection or conflict. It appeared the camp had been closed to the season before the outbreak reached this area, with staff departing in normal fashion rather than emergency evacuation. In the camp director's office, Sarah discovered a radio system more sophisticated than the 2A units we had been using. It was powered by solar panels on the roof and had considerably greater range. After some experimentation, Jake managed to get it working, scanning frequencies for any sign of organized communication. Most channels produced only static, but one frequency carried what appeared to be a regular broadcast, a repeating message, mechanical and precise. Attention survivors. Safe Zone Echo remains operational. Medical screening required for entry. Approach from designated checkpoints only. All other routes restricted by security measures. The message included coordinates that Jake marked on our maps. Safe Zone Echo was located in the mountains as we had suspected, approximately 70 miles northwest of our current position. The reference to medical screening aligned with what we have learned about mercenaries searching for specific individuals, presumably those showing immunity or resistance. More troubling was the mention of security measures on non-approved routes. This suggested the authorities controlling the safe zone had established more than just checkpoints, possibly automated systems, patrols, or other means of detecting and intercepting survivors attempting to bypass official channels. As we processed this information, Lily approached the radio with a strange expression. She placed her hand on the speaker, closed her eyes, and became unnaturally still. After several moments, she looked at me with unsettling clarity. "It's the same," she said. The voice in the radio. "It's the same as the pushing in my head." Her statement stunned us into silence. If Lily was correct, the broadcast was somehow connected to the signal controlling the infected. The implications were staggering. Was the government, or whatever remained of it, somehow responsible for or connected to the outbreak itself? That night, we established proper security rotations in the camp, allowing everyone to get meaningful rest for the first time in days. With shelter, supplies, and transportation secured, we could afford to spend time developing a more comprehensive plan for reaching the mountains, or deciding whether that remained our best option. During my watch shift, I found myself drawn to the camp director's office, where the radio continued to scan frequencies. The repeating message about Safe Zone Echo had stopped, replaced by occasional fragments of communication. Brief exchanges between patrols, status reports, coded references to operations and locations. I was about to leave when a new transmission came through, clearer than the others. A voice was providing a situation report to an unseen superior. Target acquisition at hardware store location unsuccessful. One detained for processing, others escaped. Tracking indicates movement northwest towards Sector 7. Additional resources requested for intercept. They were hunting us specifically. The one detained had to be Oscar. Whether he was still alive or what processing entailed, I couldn't know. But their organized pursuit confirmed his sacrifice had indeed allowed our escape, and that we remained high-priority targets. I immediately alerted Jake, and together we awakened the others for an emergency council. The mercenaries' pursuit meant our respite at the camp would be brief. We needed to either prepare for imminent conflict or depart before they traced us to this location. The vehicles transformed our strategic options. With transportation, reaching the mountains became feasible even with children. But approaching Safe Zone Echo through official channels meant submitting to the medical screening that was separating survivors based on unknown criteria. The alternative, attempting to bypass security measures, carried its own substantial risks. Sarah proposed a third option. The camp's remote location and substantial supplies made it defensible. With proper preparations, we could establish a longer-term safe haven here, avoiding both the mercenaries and the uncertainties of the safe zone. The decision wasn't just tactical but philosophical. What kind of world were we trying to reach? One where authority and order had been restored, but potentially at the cost of freedom and transparency. Or one where we created our own community, independent but isolated. The debate about our next steps continued through the night. Stay and fortify the camp or move toward the mountains in Safe Zone Echo. Each option carried risks and potential rewards that we weighed carefully against our dwindling time before the mercenaries tracked us down. Jake argued for immediate movement. They're closing in. Every hour we stay makes detection more likely. The vehicles give us a chance to break contact completely if we move now. Elaine countered with concerns about the children's safety and the unknown reception we might face at Safe Zone Echo. The medical screening, they're conducting separates people. What happens to those who don't pass their criteria? We could be delivering ourselves and these children directly into danger. Sarah supported staying and defending the camp. We have supplies, shelter, defensive positions. We know this territory now. Out there, we're exposing ourselves to both infected and mercenaries with no guarantee of sanctuary. Throughout the discussion, I noticed Lily sitting slightly apart, her expression distant yet focused. She seemed to be listening to something beyond our conversation. When there was a natural pause, she spoke with that unnerving clarity that had become more pronounced. "They're following the quiet ones," she said. "The ones who can hear without changing. But they're not the only ones looking." When I asked who else was looking, she pointed to her head. "The signal people. They want us back." Her statement shifted our entire understanding of the situation. If Lily's perception was accurate, we were caught between two forces, the mercenaries hunting those resistant to infection, and whatever entity was generating the signal that controlled the infected. Both wanted the same targets, but for different purposes. I made the final decision. We would move immediately, but not directly to Safe Zone Echo. Instead, we would head northwest into the mountains along a route that avoided both the official checkpoints and the most likely mercenary patrol areas. From a higher vantage point was secure terrain. We could better assess our options while being more difficult to track. Preparations moved quickly after that. We loaded the vehicles with essential supplies: food, water, medical kits, tools, weapons, cold weather gear. The pickup truck would carry our heaviest equipment and serve as a scout vehicle. The small bus would transport the rest of us, with its larger capacity allowing for rest rotations during travel. Just before dawn, as we were making final preparations, our perimeter alarm triggered, a system of cans and wire Jake had established around the camp. Someone or something was approaching from the east, the direction of the town we'd fled. Jake took a position on the lodge roof with his compound bow. I joined him, using binoculars to scan the tree line. In the growing light, I detected movement. Tactical, purposeful movement of multiple individuals spread in standard search formation. The mercenaries had found us faster than anticipated. We had minutes at most before they would reach the camp proper. I signaled to Elaine and Sarah to get the children into the bus immediately while Jake and I delayed the approaching force. We had prepared for this possibility with a series of noise diversions placed around the camp perimeter. Simple devices that would create sounds to draw attention and potentially infect it as well. Jake activated the first diversion, a timer-rigged radio playing at high volume from inside an empty cabin on the far side of camp. As expected, the mercenary formation immediately shifted toward the sound, their training apparently still prioritizing stealth over direct confrontation. This gave us the opening we needed. I ran back to the vehicles as Jake covered our retreat from his elevated position. The pickup truck was already running with Elaine at the wheel. The bus's engine turned over as I approached, Sarah behind the wheel with the children secured inside. We had planned our exit route carefully, a service road leading away from the main entrance, less likely to be monitored. The pickup would go first, checking for threats, with the bus following at a safe distance. Radio contact would be maintained only as absolutely necessary to avoid detection. As we prepared to move out, Jake suddenly signaled from his position, more movement from the west. A second team approaching from the direction opposite the first. We were being surrounded in a coordinated operation. There was no time to formulate a new plan. I signaled for immediate departure, knowing Jake would need to make his own way to the vehicles. He understood, nodding once before turning his attention back to the approaching threats. Elaine gunned the pickup down the service road, the bus following closely. I took a defensive position at the rear of the bus, watching for pursuit. The mercenaries reacted quickly to our movement, breaking cover to chase on foot, while calling for vehicle support on the radios. We had perhaps a minute lead, not enough to escape cleanly. I was preparing to engage pursuers when Jake appeared, sprinting from a cabin near the road. He made it to the bus just as the first mercenaries came into firing range. Sarah slowed just enough for him to jump aboard, then accelerated hard down the rough road. The service road connected to a forestry track that wound deeper into the foothills, too narrow for larger vehicles but passable for our pickup and small bus. This was our advantage. Any pursuing military-style vehicles would need to take longer routes to intercept us. For several miles, we moved without incident, the terrain becoming steeper and the vegetation denser. Radio checks with Elaine in the lead vehicle confirmed no immediate pursuit. We had successfully broken contact, at least temporarily. Then Lily, sitting near the front of the bus, suddenly gripped Sarah's seat. "Stop," she said with such authority that Sarah instinctively braked. People ahead, waiting. Jake moved to the front windows, scanning the road ahead. At first, he saw nothing, then nodded grimly. Ambush position. About half a mile ahead where the road narrows between rock formations. Somehow, Lily had detected the threat before it was visually apparent. Her developing sensitivity to the signal was evolving in ways we couldn't fully understand. But her warning had potentially saved us from driving directly into a trap. I radioed Elaine to stop the pickup. We needed an alternative route immediately. The map showed no other vehicle passable paths in our immediate vicinity. We were forced to make a difficult decision: abandon the vehicles and continue on foot or risk confrontation. Sarah identified a third option. Having worked at the camp for years, she knew the terrain better than the maps showed. There was an old logging track that diverged from our current road about a quarter-mile back. Overgrown and officially closed, it might still be passable with our vehicles if we moved carefully. We reversed course cautiously, locating the nearly invisible turn Sarah had described. The track was indeed heavily overgrown, with young trees and shrubs reclaiming the path. The pickup could force a way through, creating a path for the bus to follow. Progress was painfully slow. Every yard gained required cautious assessment of terrain that could disable our vehicles. The noise of breaking vegetation and straining engines made stealth impossible. If infected were in the area, they would be drawn to us quickly. After nearly an hour of this difficult progress, the track emerged onto a wider fire road that showed signs of more recent use. Tire tracks, boot prints, and even shell casings suggested we weren't the first to seek this back route into the mountains. By mid-morning, we had put significant distance between ourselves and the camp, climbing steadily into more rugged terrain. The improved road allowed faster travel, though we maintained vigilant watches for both mercenary patrols and infected. Lily's condition continued to evolve during our journey. She would alternate between periods of almost trance-like stillness and moments of intense alertness, when she would report pushings, getting stronger or shifting direction. Elaine monitored her closely, concerned about both her physical and mental state. Around noon, we reached a vantage point that offered a view of the valleys below and the mountains ahead. Jake, using binoculars, identified several plumes of smoke rising from what appeared to be established positions, likely checkpoints controlling access to Safe Zone Echo. More concerning were the moving dust trails indicating vehicle patrols crisscrossing the approaches to these checkpoints. The mercenaries had established a comprehensive security perimeter that would be difficult to penetrate undetected. We used this rest position to refine our plan. The map showed a series of hunting cabins scattered throughout the higher elevations. Sarah knew several of these from camp excursions and suggested they might offer temporary shelter and potential supply caches as we moved deeper into the mountains. Our immediate goal became reaching the nearest cabin before nightfall. It was positioned near a stream that fed into the lake by the summer camp, offering both water access and a potential route further into the mountains by following the watercourse upstream. The road conditions deteriorated as we climbed, forcing slower, more careful driving. Fuel consumption increased with the challenging terrain, adding another timer to our already precarious situation. We would need to abandon the vehicles eventually, transitioning to foot travel through the most difficult passages. By late afternoon, we were forced to stop the vehicles about a mile short of our targeted cabin. A landslide had taken out a section of the road, making it impassable. We would need to proceed on foot, carrying only what was absolutely essential. We consolidated supplies into backpacks, prioritizing water, food, medical necessities, and cold weather gear. The children could carry only minimal personal items. Everything else would have to be left behind or cached for potential recovery later. As we prepared for the hike, Jake discovered something concerning about the landslide. This wasn't natural, he said, pointing to evidence of explosive residue and deliberate cutting of support trees. Someone wanted to close this road to vehicles. Recently. This suggested we might be heading toward another human presence, potentially hostile, potentially allies. Either way, approaching the cabin required additional caution. Jake would scout ahead while the rest of us moved as a protected unit with the children in the center. The hike was challenging, especially for the younger children. The elevation and rough terrain tired them quickly, requiring frequent rest stops. As dusk approached, we were still some distance from the cabin. Traveling in darkness would increase risks substantially. I made the decision to establish a temporary camp in a defensible position short of our goal. A natural rock formation offered protection on three sides with a single approach that could be monitored. We set up minimal shelter using tarps from our supplies and established a watch rotation. During the night, Lily experienced what Elaine described as an episode. She became rigid, eyes open but unseeing, breathing rapid and shallow. When she recovered, she was disoriented but insistent about sharing what she had experienced. "They're winged people," she said, "the quiet ones, taking them somewhere deep in the mountains. Not the safe zone. Somewhere else." When asked who was moving people, her answer was cryptic but chilling. "The same ones who made the signal. They're calling everyone back." By morning, her condition had stabilized, but her perception of the signal had clearly intensified. She could now point in the direction of what she called the strongest pushing, which aligned roughly with the location of Safe Zone Echo according to our maps. We resumed our journey at first light, reaching the hunting cabin by mid-morning. As Jake had suspected, the cabin showed signs of recent occupation: food wrappers, displaced furniture, a fire pit with ash not yet dispersed by weather. Inside, we found something unexpected: a hand-drawn map pinned to the wall with routes marked in different colors. Notes at the margins indicated patrol schedules, sensor locations, and blind approaches. Someone had been systematically mapping the security around Safe Zone Echo, identifying weaknesses and potential infiltration routes. Most significant was a clearly marked location labeled Secondary Facility, deeper in the mountains, beyond the official safe zone. This aligned with Lily's description of where quiet ones were being taken. Additional notes referred to test subjects and signal strength measurements. While we were examining this valuable intelligence, Jake, who was keeping watch outside, signaled for silence. Someone was approaching. A single individual moving with purpose but not attempting particular stealth. We took defensive positions, weapons ready. The cabin door opened to reveal a face I recognized immediately: Marcus, one of the police officers we had met at the sporting goods store. He showed no surprise at finding us there. "Thought you might make it this far," he said calmly. "Been tracking your group since you left town. Figured you'd use this route." His revelation that he had been following us raised immediate suspicions, but he quickly clarified his intentions. He wasn't working with the mercenaries. In fact, his group had been systematically gathering intelligence on their operations and the true nature of Safe Zone Echo. "It's not a refuge," he explained. "It's a processing center. They're separating people based on their response to what they're calling the signal. Anyone who shows resistance gets transferred to a research facility deeper in the mountains." This confirmed what we had pieced together from Lily's perceptions and our own observations. Marcus went on to explain that his group had established a network of actual safe houses throughout the region, independent of official control. They were gathering like-minded survivors, and particularly those showing signal resistance, protecting them from both the infected and mercenary collection efforts. When I asked why he had followed us specifically, his answer was direct: the children, especially the girl. Kids are showing the highest resistance rates. Something about developing brains that adults don't have. They're the most valuable targets for both sides. Marcus proposed bringing us to his group's main camp, hidden in a valley system that mercenary patrols had not yet discovered. They had established sustainable food production, security protocols, and even a rudimentary research program trying to understand the signal and infection mechanics. While his offer was tempting, I remained cautious. His appearance seemed too convenient, his knowledge too specific. I asked how he had found us so easily when mercenary patrols with better equipment and resources were still searching. "Because I'm like her," he said, nodding toward Lily. "I can feel the signal too. Not as strongly as a child, but enough to sense others who can resist it. We find each other, like recognizes like." To demonstrate, he described the exact sensations Lily had been reporting: the pushing feeling, the directional awareness, the ability to sense infected and other resistant individuals. Details we had not shared with anyone outside our immediate group. Lily approached him without fear, studying his face with intense concentration. After a moment, she nodded. "He's quiet inside." Like me, her endorsement carried significant weight. Throughout our journey, her perceptions had proven accurate in ways that defied conventional explanation. If she sensed Marcus was trustworthy, that counted for more than my lingering suspicions. We agreed to follow Marcus to his camp, but with precautions. Jake would scout ahead with him while the rest of us maintained a safe distance behind. At the first sign of betrayal or ambush, we would scatter along predetermined escape routes. The journey to Marcus's camp took the remainder of the day, following game trails and natural features that wouldn't appear on standard maps. Along the way, he explained more about what his group had learned regarding the infection and the government response. It started as a military communication experiment, he said. Using specific frequencies to enhance coordination between units, something went wrong. The signal escaped containment, affected civilian populations. Those most susceptible transformed immediately. Others, with partial resistance, took longer or transformed incompletely. According to Marcus, the government quickly lost control of both the signal and the infected population. Their current strategy involved collecting individuals with natural resistance, particularly children, hoping to develop either a method to block the signal or a way to control it for military applications. As we approached the valley where his camp was located, Marcus had us stop at a vantage point overlooking the area. Below, partially concealed by natural features and camouflage, was a community far larger than I had expected. Dozens of structures, gardens, water systems, even small livestock pens. At least 100 people moved about the settlement, conducting what appeared to be normal daily activities. "We call it Haven," Marcus said. "Started with just a few of us 6 months ago. Now we're taking in new people every week, mostly families with resistant children, but anyone willing to work together and stay independent." The sight of functioning human society after weeks of fighting for survival was overwhelming. Children played in designated areas. Adults worked at coordinated tasks. Sentries maintained watch positions with disciplined rotations. This wasn't just survival, it was rebuilding. Our arrival at Haven created immediate interest. Marcus was clearly respected, his return with new survivors a cause for cautious welcome. We were taken to a central building where a council of sorts had gathered, 5 individuals including Daniel, the other police officer we had met previously. The council interviewed us thoroughly, particularly interested in our encounters with mercenary patrols and Lily's developing abilities. They confirmed much of what Marcus had told us about the nature of the infection and the government's response, adding details from other survivors who had escaped processing facilities. "The infection doesn't kill," one council member explained. "It hijacks neural pathways, particularly those related to auditory processing. The transformed aren't dead. They're receiving and responding to the signal with all higher functions suppressed. Those with natural resistance can hear the signal but maintain their own identity and control." This explained why the infected responded so specifically to sound. Their brains were continuously processing audio input, both physical sounds and the underlying signal controlling their behavior. It also explained why children like Lily could perceive the signal without being overwhelmed by it. Their developing brains processed it as information rather than command. The council offered us sanctuary at Haven with conditions. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Security protocols must be strictly followed, and those with signal resistance would participate in their research program. This last condition gave me pause, but they quickly clarified that participation was observational and non-invasive, nothing like the government's experimental approach. As night fell over Haven, I found myself on the edge of the settlement, looking back toward the mountains where Safe Zone Echo and its mysterious research facility operated. The choice between independence and government protection had been made for us by circumstances, but I wondered about others still making their way through the chaos, unaware of the true nature of the sanctuary being offered. Those first 72 hours after the outbreak had taught me everything I needed to know about survival in the new world. The infected hunt by sound, but there's something deeper guiding them too. A signal that connects them, directs them, controls them. And somewhere in that signal may lie the key to humanity's future. In Haven, we found others who understood this reality. People committed not just to surviving, but to understanding and eventually countering the force that had transformed our world. The children, especially Lily, would be crucial to that effort, their natural resistance potentially showing the way toward broader immunity or even a cure. Until then, we would build, learn, and prepare. Because in this new world where the dead are always listening, the most powerful weapon isn't firearms or fortifications, it's silence and the ability to hear the signal without answering its call.